Welcome to my tactical analysis of Arsenal 0, Newcastle United 2 in the League Cup semi-final first leg at the Emirates Stadium. A little bit formal of an opening, it's not one I usually do, but I'm doing it because I've got a story to share with you. And this is directly relating to Mikel Arteta and what he tells his players, the way he motivates them, the way he gets them to perform in the way that he would like them to from his personal experiences. It's through stories of his past and his childhood and how he got to where he is. It's similar to the way Sir Alex Ferguson would do it at Manchester United, where he'd talk about his parents and the way they brought him up and the work that they did on the shipyards up in Scotland. And that would be told in hopes of resonating with the fellow players that came from working class backgrounds and how their families would have worked hard and done things they didn't want to do and done everything they could so their child could have the lives that they currently have, which is obviously a fantastic, luxurious life, being a high-end professional footballer, and how that working class background existed in them, so they had to go out and fight to win and achieve what they wanted to achieve, and it obviously worked. Trophy-laden history as a manager, Sir Alex Ferguson. Mikel Arteta tells stories of when he was a kid, and after school he would make movements around local cafes, local pubs, local restaurants, local clubs, whatever. And what he would do is he would take empty glass bottles, empty plastic cups, glass cups, anything of the sort really, branded, non-branded. He would take them up and he would recycle them and take them to local waste facilities, recycling facilities and bottle banks to get rid of them. And in turn, he'd pick up a small wage, which is obviously fairly humble in terms of what he would be earning now and what he did earn as a professional football player. But those little bits of wages added up to him being able to afford the transport to go to play football in the various clubs he was playing for when he was a kid, that could obviously hone his qualities as a footballer that he would later demonstrate in his career. It gave him the possibility to afford some half-decent gear, which he wouldn't have got through his family and his humble upbringing. Also, he could give himself the best possible chance of accomplishing what he's gone on to accomplish. And while there's certain metaphorical aspects of what Sir Alex Ferguson tells his players, Mikel Arteta's is a little bit more on the nose, and because what he is doing is he is telling them the story of his first bottle job. Arsenal attacking phase first, let's get on with that. Oh, there's going to be some responses to that intro. Went a little bit of a different direction, but hey-ho, new year, new me and all that. Now, Arsenal would look to build up in this fashion. As you can see here, it would be with Rice and Partey narrowing up in the midfield, but they would build up very wide. Again, Lewis Skelly at left back, Timber at right back, pushing on a little bit further. Timber, more often than not, further than Lewis Skelly. Timber also has the potential to move inside because of just the general way he plays. Saliba and Gabriel fairly well split, allowing Raya to get on the ball in the middle of them and use his fantastic playmaking abilities as a goalkeeper to progress the ball. Martinelli, Havertz and Trossard up top, and Odegaard as the 8 in this position, wearing the number 8 as well. He would be pressed by Joel Linton, which I feel like is fairly easy and self-explanatory to explain from a Newcastle point of view. Arsenal's greatest attacking technical threat. You match him with your biggest physical, energetic, dominant player you have in your defensive stage, and that's Joel Linton. Wins every duel near enough that comes his way. And again, Newcastle, like they would, full press, aggressive, man-to-man. Murphy coming up to Gabriel at left centre-back, Isak onto Saliba in the right centre-back position, Gordon falling onto Timber, Livramento coming up from right back to mark Lewis Skelly, and Tonali and Willock coming onto the deeper midfield too. The back three left on the remaining forwards. And so it was clear what Newcastle try and do. Force turnovers, win the ball back as high as possible, and then get their quick and technical players on the ball into goal-scoring opportunities as quickly as they possibly can. Now, where Arsenal are a dangerous team is they're not just capable of building up short, they're more than happy going long up to the forward players, trying to get onto Havertz, to Martinelli to win their duels and look for the second balls and then play from there. Problem is against Newcastle is you're dealing with a very physically dominant team that can win their duels, especially when they're aerial. And Dan Burn and Sven Botman in particular, fantastic aerial presences to win those long balls. So Raya had to be a bit smarter and cuter with his passing out from the back. And you do that sometimes with the rotations of certain players. Sometimes Lewis Skelly would come inside, allowing Rice to push a little bit further up. This did cause some confusion between the likes of Tonali, Livramento and Murphy. Sometimes you get maybe Murphy coming inside or Livramento coming inside. Tonali would drop in a little bit more to maybe try and be a bit more curious and watchful of Rice's positioning. But these little moments did cause a little bit of confusion, and sometimes Lewis Skelly or maybe Partey or whoever could get on the ball in these deeper positions and play forward. But what Newcastle were good at is reacting. So let's just say if Lewis Skelly was the free man and the pass went to him, they'd have to be really adept at anticipating that correctly. So let's just say if Lewis Skelly was in this position, Livramento was caught in a bit of no man's land, and I don't know where I put the ball. If the ball went from Raya to Lewis Skelly, Livramento would read that perfectly. Maybe Murphy would, maybe Tonali would nip in front, and they'd get in front and win the ball back quickly to then engage in an attacking moment. So as much as Raya's passing is good, Newcastle was so adept at jumping into space to make sure they were winning the balls as quickly as they possibly can and as aggressively as they possibly can, jumping when they needed to. Obviously that can give away space, and when you're in a man-to-man system and a player is essentially leaving their man, that creates openings. The only problem with an Arsenal, well, there's two problems actually I'm going to go over. One is the midfield area. Now, Odegaard remained high up the pitch. He was matched by Joelinton. Joelinton didn't really give him an inch to receive the ball from deep, where Odegaard could then play forward. So, on the other side, you had Declan Rice, who did receive the ball because of this deeper positioning, creating problems. The ball could sometimes come to him if Arsenal played it quick enough, and he could turn inside to his favoured right foot and try and switch the play to the likes of Trossard, to the likes of Havertz if he found himself in the right wing position. The biggest problem with this is Rice is not a technically elite player. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'm not going to get too deep into it. I think he's a little bit overrated. That's just me. You can disagree with that, that's fine. I think in terms of his off-the-ball qualities, he's elite. On the ball, not for me, personally. In a top-level midfield, hoping to dominate the ball and have clean, high-level possession, he's just not got those qualities in his locker. And there were so many times he tried to spread the play, and the pass was either too far, so the point where it goes out for a throw, and too short, where Hall or Bourne could intercept and get it clear. And then when he's not trying to play those sort of Hail Mary passes, he's playing it short, he's playing it basic, and by that point Newcastle are getting back into shape and they're able to reduce the space that the likes of Martinelli and Havertz can use. That was one problem. Another problem was the positioning of Havertz and Martinelli. Havertz, a lot of the time, took positions almost as a right winger. Trossard would then react and come into space in the centre of the pitch. And I do not get why Havertz was doing this in these build-up stages, because of the way that Newcastle were pressing, the way that Arsenal were shaped up. It was very hard for them to find this pass over to this far side with the way that Newcastle would then go and press and then go and be the aggressive team. And even if Raya had a couple touches on the ball, there would be an eventual trigger for Murphy to come round, for Isak to come in from Saliba to mark him and press him and force him into errors. But it just made no sense to me. His position for me was surely going to be better in the centre of the pitch, while against Dan Burn is a hard player to match physically and aerially. He shouldn't be shy. You know, he has enough physicality, he has enough aerial threat to be able to contest those duels and get Arsenal up the pitch. And if he did drop into positions to receive it, again, far too deep to get on the ball and try and overload, Burn would follow him, he'd match him, he'd mark him, and he'd be aggressive in it and win the ball back. Another one was Martinelli. Now, Martinelli is obviously the one transitional threat that Arsenal have in this team in terms of a direct running threat in behind with his pace. And while there was a few times he did it, and him and Havertz did sort of combine, with Havertz creating space in between Burn and Hall, so Martinelli could run off of Botman into this area to receive the ball from deep. He did so and hit the post with a decent effort. And there was a couple times in the second half where he used split-second movements to get free. Didn't happen at all. The problem was with Martinelli was he was too keen on dropping so unnecessarily deep to receive the ball maybe from Raya in these deeper areas to turn and play. Martinelli in these positions is useless. I don't know why he's so insistent on coming back and coming into deeper areas to get on the ball. It's not where his qualities lie. Newcastle in these areas can congest the centre of the pitch and react to close him down. So let's just say if he does get a bit free from Botman, he'll come into the centre area. That could then trigger Joelinton to come and win the ball. And Martinelli isn't as good technically in confined spaces to make the most of these opportunities. With the way he plays as a fast direct attacking player, they typically take touches that extend away from their body a bit more, causing someone to react when they've got bodies in the centre. Pointless, didn't offer anything, needed to offer more of a transitional threat, him and Havertz, and they didn't do it anywhere near as much. But the more Arsenal went direct and the more control they got in the game when Newcastle started sitting back, they'd get into a more attacking phase, and this is how it would look. Arsenal would attack in their sort of 3-2-5, Lewis Skelly and Partey as the double pivots. In front of that back three as Timber would drop in. You'd sometimes get Partey or Lewis Skelly dropping in to create a back four to make it as wide as possible and try and play around the Newcastle shape. Newcastle were in a deep 5-4-1 once they needed to drop in, with Jacob Murphy dropping into a right-back position as Livramento moved inside, so they were able to match Arsenal's 5 man for man. It would be hard for Arsenal to play in the middle of the pitch, especially with the midfield 4 narrowing up, doing a very disciplined job. You'd still get the occasional issue with the Newcastle shape, which is sometimes there's a little bit too much space between defence and midfield that they could capitalise on, especially with Havertz moving out into the right wing, which he did a lot in certain times. You'd get the occasional link up between Trossard and Odegaard where they could play through and use their little one-touch passing play to create opportunities, or at least create openings where the shot could come from outside the box. But generally Newcastle kept them out, and more often than not, it would be to force crossing opportunities with the likes of Trossard and Odegaard linking up on the right-hand side, maybe Timber coming forward, or Martinelli to try and attack Murphy or Livramento to play a cross in. And there was the occasional time they found the odd bit of success to play it either into Havertz or whoever in the box to get headed chances on goals. The only problem is when Havertz gets a chance at goal is that the goal doesn't double in size, and he misses it pretty frequently. Look, he's a good player, Havertz, but he's never going to be elite. I think he had that purple patch towards the end of last season and in the start of this season. He's a good player, he's a serviceable player, he offers you something that's useful in a team. He's never going to be a starting striker in a team that's going to win you the league. I mean, if you swapped Martinelli and Havertz for Isak and Gordon, you were maybe talking about a different result. So that's what it is. Full credit to Newcastle, they defended excellently, great discipline from the midfield. Tonali especially is growing into that holding midfield role excellently. Burn, Botman were all fantastic. Murphy's graveyard shift, and it just wasn't good enough from Arsenal. Crosses after crosses, had a good few set-piece chances, but other than that, you can't always rely on set pieces, so very little. But we'll go on to the Newcastle attacking phase now. So Newcastle would build up in the 2-3-2-3. Tonali is the pivot in between the fullbacks. Joe Willock and Joe Linton high up in the 8 positions with the front 3, as you'd expect. Arsenal would press in a 4-4-2, and they'd be triggered into their press very aggressively. They'd be combative, they'd win the ball back as quickly and highly as they could, and they'd force Newcastle over to their left side. So let's just say if the ball started with Botman, or it went to Botman from Dubravka, Havertz would jump up from his position. You'd then get him shadowing the pass into Tonali, which forces the ball over to Dan Burn, where Odegaard would be ready to spring, to press and try and win the ball back. This would force Declan Rice onto Sandro Tonali. Martinelli would come into Willock. Partey would cover around to Joe Linton. Hall, because of this pressure that Odegaard would apply, would naturally come in a little bit deeper. Trossard would follow him in to look for the easy pass, but because of the press from Trossard, it left him with very little options. So sometimes you'd have to turn on the outside and blast the ball over the top, hoping that Gordon could get on the end of it to mix success. And with Gordon, Isak and Murphy, that offers you at least a little bit of a threat to try and win those. But when the ball's played under an intense press, that's a panicked ball. That's not one with quality, and you're gambling essentially. So it would often work out with him maybe going back to Burn, or him maybe going back to Dubravka, to then look to either go direct again up to that same front 3, but he had a bit more of a better range to hit them with because he had the view of the pitch a bit more centrally. Or if the ball did go to Dubravka and Odegaard and Havertz could drop off a little bit and it would turn back into a more orthodox 4-4-2, he could do one of two things. One would be to try and play through the way he was going to do it before by playing it to Botman or whoever, which would then cause Arsenal to press again and force them into that left-hand side and again try and win the ball back. They have a lot better presses with Odegaard and Trossard on that right-hand side, Partey backing them up as well, matching Joel Linton physically. Or could go in a little bit longer, and Tonali would have to be very smart in his positioning about where he was to make sure there was a lane open, whether he came over to his side or stayed centrally. And Willock and Joe Linton would then use Partey and Rice, who would typically look to stay closer to them, to open up and create space where Alexander Isak could do this. He could chauffeur the ball a lot deeper. Gabriel and Saliba could occasionally react and go up to press him and try and prevent him from getting on the ball. But this in line shows, I mean, Newcastle's qualities in general, but Alexander Isak's especially. Where I was critical with Arsenal that they don't have that transitional threat, Newcastle have it. Murphy, Gordon and Isak all have pace and technical quality to go from back to front quickly, and that is a big difference between these two teams, and it's why I think Arsenal are in a little bit of an issue with their attacking quality, as they don't have that. So Isak could drop in, receive the ball, he's technically good enough to take it under control, maybe ride the press of Gabriel and Saliba, who did a decent job against him. They didn't necessarily do anything wrong when they went to press. But him dropping in to get on the ball in these areas where he could turn and look for the run of Jacob Murphy down this right hand side, who could run off of Lewis Skelly, has the pace to do that, or find a cuter pass over to Gordon on the left hand side, who could again use his pace to penetrate. He's technically good enough to pull those actions off, and is a threat not just with his attacking qualities and his finishing, but dropping in. He's so technically good, and even if he couldn't play around the outside, he could look for maybe Tonali to get on the ball and create and use his technical qualities to get Newcastle up the pitch and have a bit of a foothold with the possession. Joe Linton and Willock as well, quality players in their own right. Or it couldn't even just be that. It couldn't just be about him getting on the ball in these areas. It could be with maybe the pass going from Dubravka to Botman, where he could then look to play the ball to Isak, who could drop in, sucker Gabriel in, and turn and make a movement into the space created in behind and look for the ball over the top. Arsenal recover well, to be fair to him, but that was always on, and he offers that. He can sucker you into a press and beat you that way, which makes him almost impossible to defend against. Do you drop off him, let him get the ball to feet, or do you be aggressive and get up against him and try and win the ball back? Either way, he's got the quality in those scenarios to just rip you to shreds, and that's when you know you're dealing with a top class player in Alexander Isak. It's a quality that very few possess in world football, and it was him dropping off into space without anyone really making the movement to go and commit to press him, where he then played the ball over to the right hand side. The ball came back to him as he made a movement into the box to get a shot away. The rebound fell to Anthony Gordon, and that made it 2-0 for Newcastle, but can't speak highly enough about him and his performance. He was fantastic, and Arsenal did not cope with him well enough at all. To be fair, a lot of teams haven't. What did the shape look like when Newcastle did get up the pitch and Arsenal were forced a little bit deeper? Arsenal was still in their 4-4-2 shape. They dropped off a lot deeper, and one thing Arsenal are on their defensive phase, very compact. Newcastle was still in their similar shape, but there'd be more activity from the fullbacks in these scenarios and how they interacted with the wingers. On the right hand side, Murphy would typically hold the width to look for the outside pass, or to look for the pass from Livramento, who could play inside or outside. And once he received the ball, you'd get the underlapping run from Tino Livramento to look for the ball in the half space. And if he couldn't receive it straight from Murphy, it could go to Willock, who could then find that first-time pass, which he is very good at, Willock. He's a very good one-touch, two-touch player, and find the underlapping run of Livramento. Rice and Martinelli had to be really alert to that, Martinelli especially, as the wide players do a lot of dropping in for Arsenal in reactionary circumstances. And to be fair, they do a really good job of it. And on the left-hand side, it would be a little bit different. Gordon would come in a little bit more narrow. Joel Linton could drop in a little bit deeper alongside Tonali. And they could then look for the long overlapping run of Lewis Hall, who would hold the width on the left-hand side and try and get crosses in, as he's got a great quality to do. Or to play it to Gordon on the inside, who could then affect the game in that way, get shots off, create opportunities, and try and overload the centre of the pitch. Again, like Martinelli on the left-hand side, Trossard had to be really well concentrated and make sure he was picking up that run of Lewis Hall, dropping into a back six or a back five when he needed to make sure that Arsenal had the width of the pitch covered and there was very little space that Newcastle had to work with in the middle of it. To be fair, the wide players in the defensive phase for Arsenal always do a really good job. But there is two big differences in the defensive phase and the attacking phase for both Arsenal and Newcastle. One, when Newcastle defended with a five, pretty much always they defended the width of the pitch really well, so there was never really an opening for Arsenal to really play over. They had to almost force openings with overloads and committing players forward and movements to draw players out of position. Whereas because of Arsenal defending in their 4-4-2, the width was always open. So let's just say if it did come into this area, Lewis Hall receiving the ball, Trossard could come in a little bit deeper, Timber would have to come across, the whole defensive line would come across, Lewis Skelly, Rice, Partey, Martinelli as well, where if the ball then fell back to any of the Newcastle players in this area, especially Tonali, and I'll go over him in a quick second, then they could recycle it onto the other side and Newcastle could then have a bit more space to attack down that wide area, as Trossard would then move back into his midfield position, and it was up for either Lewis Skelly to get into that position to move across from left back or Martinelli to drop in. But again, he's only reacting to that. He's not standing in there and ready to go and aggressively press the player on the ball, by which point Newcastle could have created an opening. Another quality that they have in these positions, which Arsenal don't, is Tonali in this deeper base, who has a fantastic passing range to be able to spread the play onto the far side and open Arsenal up. Arsenal don't have that in Partey, Rice, and even Odegaard to an extent. Jorginho slightly has it, but I don't think he has the drive of a pass that Tonali does that can spread the play quickly as possible. And Tonali has been so good since he's dropped into that pivot. Some of his passing has me taking notes on games with my left hand. That good. That's aggressive, I know. And it's just the difference in technical quality between these two teams that resulted in the scoreline being what it is. 2-0 for Newcastle. They earned it, and just because they defended and managed the game a lot more in the second half, don't take away from the fact that they had so much attacking quality in the first half. They were fantastic and just managed the game a lot better in the second half. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Like it if you liked the video, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below, tell me why either way, subscribe if you want to see more. In a bit.